Hi, I'm Rhea Khattoi, and I am the founder and CEO of Khattoi.
Hi, my name is Shivani Rani. I'm an author and a content creator.
I'm Dur E Aziz Amna. I'm a writer and the novelist of American Fever. Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here. So I've read from very early childhood, and that's sort of course, like not everyone who reads and goes on to become a writer, but I think anyone who is a writer most likely has been a voracious reader in their childhood. I just used to read a ton. I just remember being specifically just so hungry for books throughout my childhood because they were also, I mean, I wouldn't say they were like a very scarce resource, but they were not as like, now I feel very lucky that, okay, I have access to all these public libraries in the US and I can buy any book that I want and whatnot. But at that time it was very much like, you had, very few libraries. I remember my mother on the weekends, we'd like go to these like old bookstores in the center of town, and like whatever was there was what you got. I just remember specifically this like hunger for books that was just constant for me and both my brothers.
I grew up in a very traditional family where it's like the women go into bio and then the men go into engineering and comp sci or IT. I have an older sister. She works in the medical field. We all have a cousin we get compared to. She's in medical school. I'm the oddball out, and I've always been. I used to always be into all art forms. So it was drawing, dancing, painting, writing. And I was kind of told to hold back from it because they were it's not gonna get you anywhere. Art is nothing. It's just a hobby. Don't focus too much on it.
So we read a ton, and then when I was in my early teens, I started writing these short letters to the editor, or just short what I thought were funny articles for the children's section of the magazines. Then there was the sort of 2010s blog world, and I was part of that, and just writing stuff on the internet, even if it was just for the 5 people who read it. And then, so when I got into college, I decided to major in English. I took a lot of literature classes. I wrote, but I think it was still very much something that I thought I was going to do on the side of the other stuff that I did in life. And that continued for the first few years after college, because I was born and raised in Pakistan. I came here for college, and so once I graduated, I had the classic visa issues, and I need to get a job that will give you, sponsorship, and very, very few jobs in the writing, publishing world will do that. So I worked in corporate America for a few years, was trying to do writing on the weekends and evenings, but then wanted to give it more time if I could. And so then I applied for a master's in fine arts, got into that program for creative writing. What that program did was that it gave me 3 years of financial freedom and time to sort of commit to a bit larger project than just essays or short stories. And that's when I finished the book, edited it, sold it, and it came out last year.
So my background is actually in fashion. I went to college for design and merchandising at Drexel University, and then I worked first as a buyer, transitioned into brand marketing, worked the corporate side of it, worked at Target and JD Sports, and then I was kind of in a bit of a career lull. I was going to go back from brand marketing into buying when, as I was interviewing, I saw that there was a white space opportunity in the market. I personally found it really difficult to shop for sustainable South Asian clothing, and it was weird. You'd go to some random auntie's house, you didn't really know what was going on, and then I decided to just interview other people to see if anyone felt the same. So we interviewed 50 girls, age ranges 18 to 35, all around the US, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different backgrounds in India, and what I learned was not only was I the only one who felt this way, but it was 10 times worse for people who were getting married. So it was kind of something where it was started as I don't want this to be a continuous trend. I personally even would feel oh, this is so annoying, I'd rather just wear Western clothes, and I didn't want the culture to die out or have people who aren't Indian be able to not wear Indian clothing or feel comfortable in the clothing. So that's how we started.
To start, I wrote this book, and it's just a collection of poetry and prose. It has to do with my childhood, growing up, college years, my first heartbreak. And then just recently, 2 months ago, I published a novel, a really cute sports romance. Just wanted to write a normal story for 2 South Asians and have that normalcy for people like us. So this is just a videographer and a football player falling in love.
So basically American Fever is the story of a young Pakistani girl who moves from urban Pakistan, like a city in Pakistan, to rural Oregon in the US for an exchange year. And while she's there, she gets terribly sick. The story is about culture shock and assimilation, or the pressure to assimilate, and just like sort of moving away from your family for the first time. It's very much a coming of age story, but told from the perspective of someone also moving countries. I had a very similar experience. When I was in high school, I did a year-long exchange program that also took me to rural Oregon. Everything that happens in the book besides that initial setup is obviously all fiction. So like the characters that she meets there, the host parents, all of that is just totally different. But the seed for the novel was my own life.
We moved from like Minneapolis, Minnesota to Bangalore, India and back. And that was really difficult. I was probably about 12 when I knew I did not want to come back to the US. But I also knew that my mom didn't like it in India because it was like dramatically different lifestyle than what she'd gotten used to here, and made the decision to not say anything. It was also a very interesting transition, and I've also moved a lot. So while it wasn't a topic when I was younger, as I've gotten older, I've realized there's certain things that I'll do that is kind of accredited to that. I'm a very adaptable person, which is a great thing, but sometimes while adapting myself to certain situations, I would forget to make sure I'm bringing out myself too, because I was so used to moving. And I didn't realize that until I was about 25.
So I like to say that you never really know how bad it is until like it's like so bad that you're like, how did I get here? I think it was when I first got into college. Before that, like I think there were like a little bit of like signs of like depression, anxiety, but like I never like thought of it like that. I was just like told that I was a rebel kid, and like my family kind of like doesn't really believe in mental health as much, so they were always just like, oh, you're just sad, right? Like, oh, like get over it. So I would like lash out, and like I didn't know what that was until I got into college. And like freshman year of college, like I went through like the worst changes. Like it was so bad for me. Like I said, I was doing bio degree. I had met some like bad people. I was almost failing out of college. It just felt like there was this big weight on me, and I was like, I need to like change something, but like I couldn't do it. So I was told by my parents that I had to stay in STEM. Like they were like, no, you're not switching to anything other than STEM. So I switched to a psychology degree because it was also around the time where my mental health got like really bad. So I was like, okay, if I do psychology, at least I can learn about myself. I told my parents I did psychology, and it was still like an issue for them because they're like, oh, you're not going to medicine? And I was like, no, like I'm not. But I was like, I gotta do what I gotta do. Like I can't struggle in that way.
So I know that it's unfortunately very common within, I think, South Asian families, or at least South Asian families in the diaspora, that there's this feeling that like people are encouraged obviously to choose very, very stable careers over the arts. And thankfully that was not the case for me growing up. My parents are both, especially my father is a huge reader himself. From him came this inspiration to read because we constantly saw him read all the time, and then he would like share anecdotes from the books that he was reading, and so that was like something that we were aspiring to from his side. My mother was doing a lot more of the practical stuff, making sure that we had the books, like taking us to those bookstores. I remember specifically she used to teach at this college, and it had a really good library, which is very, very uncommon, or hopefully things have changed since, but at that time it was very uncommon for there to be such a well-stocked library associated with just a school. Every weekend she would ask the librarian there if we could just go there and sit there for hours, and then we'd check out way more books than were allowed on one library card. So I think my mother was always encouraging that reading in very practical ways. And I remember when I would write just those small things for the magazines, it was always sort of a cause for celebration in the family. Like my father would make me read it out anytime someone came over to the house, and like, you know, like the way you're asked to sing nursery rhymes, I'd be like brought in with a piece of paper. I have very, very good memories of that, and I think that was so important in encouraging me to be a writer.
I think when you're going off the cuff and kind of creating your own path, it's really important to have yourself surrounded by those people, because there is no milestones or pathways for you to really look at, especially when you consistently have to change and grow in terms of whatever business comes. I think my family's history inspires me and pushes me to keep going. About 2 generations ago on my dad's side, we were still kind of in a little bit of poverty. My family was not educated. My grandfather actually used to walk 2 days to get to college and just like sleep at people's houses on the way. His brother worked and gave him the money to be able to go to college. And after that, he took all of his kids and all of his brother's kids, educated them, and now I have the life that I have today. So a huge sense of, because I have the privilege, I need to do something with purpose, and not only take it further, but kind of create those opportunities for others as well.
That puts a lot of pressure on you.
I think it's a mix of, sometimes it's pressure, but more than that, I feel inspired. I think the pressure for me maybe comes a bit more from, while I do sense this, my parents also, on the other hand, want that, but they're also kind of like, we built a privileged, stable life. Like, they don't want to see me leave that privileged, stable life and be short on cash because I'm trying to start a business, or lean into anything that maybe wasn't a typical path for someone whose family has gotten some privilege from there. So I think that puts more pressure, because it feels like I'm trying to step back up to there than being inspired by the family path.
So yeah, it's funny because my father's first book literally came out like 4 months after mine. So he did that very practical, which he had to. Like, he was from the village. There was no way he was going to be, have the privilege that I do now of just writing for a living, or like trying to make a living as a writer. So throughout his life, he did like a very stable like civil service job, and he read his entire life voraciously, would sometimes write on the sides, but only after, and then once he retired, he sort of committed to, like, he started writing these essays. And what's funny about these essays is that they're all written on WhatsApp. So he like will type it out on his phone, and then he'll send them to like his friends to like check them. Those like WhatsApp essays are now compiled in a book form. It came out, and like a lot of people really liked it. And so it's been like kind of really fun that both our books came out literally within months of each other. Yeah.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
That's incredible. So do you guys like share that experience of like, what is this publishing thing? Like, how does this work? Like,
Yeah.
how does this whole world work?
Yeah. I mean, of course, it's been because he got published in Pakistan, and so it's, in some ways it's very different, but also like a lot of it's just like, he had a book launch and I had a book launch, and like, what are the things that people relate to, or what are the kinds of questions that you get asked, or so it's been very cool to sort of see that those two things happen in parallel.
I have like a good friend circle of brown people. We like break it down every day, like we'll talk. I'm very close to my sister, so I'll like tell her certain things, but like not specifics, because I'm just like not used to that. Throughout time, there has been so many like expectations put on women that like we need to like devalue those. Well, women are supposed to be like this way, that way. But I feel like, why can't we be like men, right? Like, you look at men, like they do whatever they want. Like, why can't we do that? Just being able to appreciate a woman for like who she is, and not putting expectations on her, like societal, familial, anything. Like, you just need to understand that like every woman is different.
So, with everything going on right now in the second issue of this volume, I think it'd be a really good idea, before we really get started, to kind of set the scene a little bit for what's going on in Autumnal Equinox. So why don't you go ahead and set the scene for us?
I really wanted Autumnal Equinox to be the issue that talks about our foundation, right? Because in the first issue we talked about what brings us together. This one is about what holds us up, and then the next issue will be about what separates us. I really want to portray that devotion and understanding our relationship to God can really help us understand how to treat everyone around us.
Womanhood means a lot of different things to me. I think womanhood is a lot of balance, especially as an entrepreneur. It is balancing your work, it is balancing your company, it's balancing a social life, and it's a lot of balancing your body. Whereas men entrepreneurs also still have to take care of their bodies. A lot of stress in a woman's body, if you want to have your own kids, is like deters you in the future, right? So it's like a little bit more of making sure that balance is always 100% there, and making sure that you are supported by people who reinforce your you, like your main you of who you want to be, how you want to build something, or just champion you.
So what does womanhood mean to you?
Obviously, as is the case with everyone, it's evolved so much. Going back to, all the way back to childhood, I think there's obviously for all women, there's like a certain moment in time. Perhaps it's when you get your period, or it's like there's a certain time when you realize that, okay, there is a divide. There's something that like puts you on the other side of the fence from the guys that you've been playing with all your life. And I think that, of course, that must happen everywhere. I think perhaps that is exacerbated in societies like Pakistan that are a lot of it is very segregated. It is an extremely patriarchal society. I remember for most of my teenage years feeling extremely burdened by the fact that I was a girl. And, just the fact that you have a lot more limitations on what you can do and where you can go. Like, I distinctly remember both my brothers were, at some point, I don't know why, my parents had this idea of like getting them horse riding classes. I don't know if a lot of people in Pakistan do that, but my parents really wanted my brothers. But I specifically remember that I was not enrolled in them. I'm sure a lot of it was, them just being concerned about my safety, that, she's going to be with these men alone for the class. So a lot of it comes from a place of protection. But again, that is also a double-edged sword, because it's like you are protecting someone, but you're also making them feel like they constantly, you're not giving them that confidence then. So it's not that I blame my parents at all. But it's just one example that I can remember of just feeling like, okay, this is nothing but a burden. Like this is only, there's only negatives associated with this. And it's so funny because a lot of these things sort of, carry on generation to generation too. So I know that my mother, because I remember once sharing this with her, and she said that, yes, when I was growing up, she was like, all I wanted to be was a man. Like, that is all I desired. And she tells this story of how this is like the 70s or something in Pakistan, and someone in their class like transitioned from being a woman to a man, and I think like the entire classroom was just like, all the girls were so envious. Like, everyone was like, oh my God, how do we do that? It was, I don't know, it's a very funny story, because it's like such a different context for that sort of conversation. There was definitely a certain freedom that I was able to get here, just like being able to walk openly on the street without worrying constantly. So I think that some of that burden sort of lessened. And then another huge shift obviously happened when I became a mother, because I think that's again when I like realized that, okay, there's a difference. My husband is a fantastic father, but at the end of the day, he's a father. And so there are certain things that one cannot do, two can't actually do as well as I can. I mean, I think equality, obviously, it's a great thing to aim for. I just think that it comes sometimes in interesting contrasts with the fact that there are certain things that women, whether it is through, they've been trained their entire lives to be a certain way, or whether it's biology or whatever it is, there are certain differences that you can't really eradicate. I just remember specifically when I had my first child, just going through that process and realizing just how hard it was. And then I distinctly remember being in the hospital room and feeling just this like wave after wave of rage, because I was like, oh my God, this is what all these women that I know have been through, and I've never heard of. Like, it's just, I've never heard their stories.
We'll go from the beginning. So Kundi is the mother. Okay, that's how they define her, the mother of the kingdom, the mother of the 5 Pandavas, and mother of Karnan as well. She was the strongest figure, the strongest queen of the Mahabharata. She lost her husband at a very young age, and was a single mother all her life. And she raised 5 good men for this world, for India. Okay, and Parikshit Maharaja, this yuga came about from them. Okay, so when we say this yuga, which is, the Kali Yuga came from Parikshit Maharaja, who is the grandson of Arjuna. Okay, so when we say that it just defines how great of a queen she was, who, as a single mother, raised 5 great kings. So the takeaway from her life would be how to raise the best kids, I would say, would be to follow her path. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, the most significant part of that is she did not have a very easy life to be able to raise kids just that easily. She was going through one of the toughest portions. In every stage of her life she was suffering, but that did not let her deter from her duty or a responsibility of being a good mother to her children. 2 of them was not her own, but she did unconditionally loved all of them and brought up all of them as their own. She was with them all throughout their life when they were going through struggles, and even though she did not enjoy her life herself, she knew how she was supposed to be a role model for her children and bring them. So I would say she was one of great examples of being a good mother.
The other thing that she did was keep the family united, right? So she made sure that the 5 brothers stayed together. They had to share everything, including the wife.
Yep.
Which is controversial, but that's what she did.
Yes, and I think I've read accounts of this, that her strategy behind having Draupadi marry all the children, all their sons together, was to make sure that the children stand united. When there is going to be a fight against adharma, that there has to be a single force that keeps them united. And after her, I think the wife takes up the duty after a mother to keep the
family together.
If we can switch over to Draupadi, I think she obviously did that part of keeping them together. And one of the things that we see in the women of Mahabharata is none of them had a very happy, joyous life. Like, everybody had struggles and adversities, and sometimes unfair stuff happening to them. But all throughout, the common denominator, if you see across all the women of Mahabharata, is how they stood up for themselves and did not let the situations around them bring them down. And
they did their duty, in
yes.
other words. Yeah, the responsibility was their number one thing.
I have been surrounded by a lot of people who've come and been like, this is what you were supposed to do. So that is incredible, I think. I am also surrounded by a lot of people who will remind me, even when I am financially feeling strapped, of like, you don't need that right now, it's okay, like, make the risk, you'll make this up. Like, I've had a lot of people kind of look out for me, and just lucky, even when I'm having those days, I can reach out to people and it's like, it's okay, like, it'll happen, just stay calm, like, you know what you're doing, and kind of talk things out. What I think has been more difficult for me, and I will also say I've made great relationships being an entrepreneur and founder. The rooms it's put me in to meet the right people has been incredible, and I don't think I would have been able to meet these people without having Khattoi with me. From a relationship standpoint, it's been hard. I frequently have gotten told no one wants to date someone who owns their own business. No one wants to bring home a girl who doesn't have a traditional 9-to-5. So
Why?
I don't know.
What are those expectations?
That are like put on us. You have to be quiet when you're in a room. You have to sit ladylike. You're like the house runner, right? Cook, clean, do this. Why can't a man do that? It's literally just a life role. Like, you need to be able to do these things in order to live. So why is that not put on a man to like run the house? That's like what's so important, to feel like we have a voice, and we don't half the time. Even though, like, when you like say the expectations of like being the pillar, they say that, but it's like you're still not allowed to do the things you want to do. So I think it's very important to give a woman her space. You do like what makes you happy, instead of like, you know, calling you the pillar of the house, but like the man is like the one controlling everything.
there is a saying in Tamil, "Paatharam arindhu bichai." So you have to raise your voice. You have to know where to raise your voice and where to know your place and just step away. I feel like Gandhari knew that she was forced into that marriage, unlike other women of that era where they were allowed to have Swayamvaram and be able to choose her groom. And this was her way of kind of protesting that silently, doing a silent passive-aggressive protest that if you do this to me, I'm not going to be by your side watching you do all the bad stuff. I will tie my eyes and I will not be by your side. And that's her way of saying that without saying that. If she had not done that, I think she would have been forced to openly accept what her husband was doing.
Because I think that by closing her eye, she refused to see sometimes the evil in her children, okay? And she didn't correct them. And I think that's a faulty behavior. If you see something wrong, you have to correct it.
Society has moved in a much different direction than the previous yugam. You know, it's really hard to compare what our life is like to, for example, Draupadi and like her struggle, or Kunti and her life. Like, it's hard to relate the two because in some ways Draupadi, they're like devas, you know? And so it's hard to comprehend how we can use the stories of the Mahabharata to apply to our life. But I think that's why you read stuff like the Bhagavad Gita and you read our scriptures, because I think it like clearly defines like, hey, this is how you see other people. This is how you deal with these mental struggles. This is how you deal with separation.
I think the beautiful part about our scripture, right, even if you look at the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana, independently, they're both their own contained stories of what happened with Ram, what happened with Arjuna, Krishna, Pandava, everything. But the thematic elements, the messages are very fluid, right? They change with the times because they take place in completely different yugams. Society is fundamentally different.
In between even just Rama's time and Krishna's time.
Yeah, and so when it comes to what you see, like for example, Sita and Rama are a lot more stoic in terms of the way their roles are, right? And I think there's strength in both of them. And I think it's the same kind of strength, right? I think if the roles were reversed in the Ramayana, you would find that it wouldn't be much different, because the point in the Ramayana was never, oh, this is what a woman has to do, this is what a man has to do. It was, what is my duty in this world? Regardless of what I was born as, regardless of who I am as a person, like, I want to do my duty and be the version of myself that gets into moksha. And in the Mahabharata, it's different. You know, now people's interests, people's desires is very much infused into the characters. Even the ones that are literal children of gods may not be godly at all times. They might not act godly at all times. They might act really human. And I think that shows that blending of what's going on with men and women.
How it like kind of trickles down into this yugam, where that disruption is now in the individual and not just in the family, like how it was in, you know, in the Dwapara yugam, and then in the Treta yugam, where it was like in the same world, and then the yugam before that, the Satya yugam, it was on different planes, like good and evil. So now seeing how good and evil is now within the individual, like that we are all good and evil, right? That's really interesting to look at, because I feel like a lot of times we've weaponized the differences that we have for each other, and we use them in arguments, we use them as reasons to be away from each other. And sometimes I wish that we were able to look at these differences and just accept them as differences.
Yeah, and I find it to be really interesting, the point that you mentioned about like weaponizing our differences. We see that at the forefront of the things that we consume in media. These differences that have cropped up over time, not only are people finding ways to weaponize them, but also ways to commercialize and profit off them. We talk a lot about emotions in the context of women, but you've all understood toxic masculinity and what it is and how men perceive emotions, right? And how we are educated and told to suppress them. And then we end up putting that on women, so that when women express their emotions, we're like, oh, you're being emotional.
Right.
Because that's what we were told. Right. We were told that men don't cry, that men don't, it's all projection. We're just projecting onto each other, which is interesting because we're both telling ourselves not to be emotional and pointing the finger at somebody else about their emotional state. Like, you're not emotionally available, or you're too emotional.
What does womanhood mean to you?
I think it's just being feminine and like okay with it. There's been so many changes where it's like we have our masculinity out there and like we have to be like hard and tough. But like, why can't we just be like girls? Like, why do we have to like conform to this like harder version of ourselves? Just free, open, like with opinions, have strong opinions. You do have a part in society. That's really important for every woman to like understand. You can put your voice out there, people will listen now.
a lot of our culture has moved past this idea that, okay, the sort of like the trope of the girl boss, for instance, which is like, okay, you're doing everything exactly the way a man does. What I have recently learned about, there's been this group of feminists in the US for a while who've been talking about this idea of wages for housework, which is that basically instead of trying to get women to do exactly what men do, which, I mean, of course, if that's what they want to do, they should do it. But the idea that, like, why would you not instead compensate them for taking care of their own children or being at home or having that freedom and being compensated for it, like placing value on that thing, that should also be compensated in the same way as if she were working outside the house. To me, it's been a very revolutionary idea, and it's taught me that, okay, there are like ways of thinking beyond this binary of like stay at home and look after your kids, or like, and I think a lot of that already exists, like the fact that we have any kind of parental leave that we have is already, you're compensating people for taking care of their families. So some of those things already exist, and how do we make that even more of a thing? But okay, going back to now the history thing. A lot of my upbringing was religious, and we were constantly hearing stories of, the early days of Islam, and I think so much of the way Islam is practiced in Pakistan today, unfortunately, is extremely patriarchal. But I think when we read a lot of the stories in the books, so many of them were about the women in early Islam, and so they were about the Prophet's wives, or the fact that the very first person to convert to Islam was a woman, and she was a merchant at that time. So she was a divorced woman who had like her own business. Then like another woman is Zainab, who is the granddaughter of the Prophet. She's considered like this person who stood up against evil, and like there's a sermon that she specifically gave that is now extremely well known, and she's considered like a strong example of like a very, very brave woman in early Islam. And so that dichotomy is so interesting to me, that now, of course, because so many of these things are politicized and used by the people who are already in power. So right now, the way Islam is practiced in places like Pakistan, to me, feels extremely patriarchal. But a lot of the stories that we heard were very different from that.
We know these stories, we've grown up in these stories, whether it was just like the tale of, Krishna or the Mahabharata or whatever through cartoon books, but like you grow up knowing these stories, but multiple people still grow up with this argument against it. Personally, for me, I have grown up always knowing that during Krishna's time, there was a Kali Yuga shift, and we became into the Kali Yuga of more like greed. There's a story of the farmer and the landowner, right? But we know this, or multiple people know this. Just because you know that the Kali Yuga has changed doesn't mean that you have to subscribe to it. They say knowledge is power, right? But it's not just knowledge is power. If you use the knowledge to act, that's power.
Is history relevant or irrelevant? Say Kunti, the Rajamata, raised as a single mother. Okay, that's a key thing for this generation. 5 obedient, where their integrity was their number one thing, duty was their number one thing. They followed the dharma to the core. And when they got married to Draupadi had immense faith in God. Okay, she had a very special relationship with Lord Krishna, where she could just summon him and he would just come. And that happened when she was disrobed. She called everyone else, all the kings on the land, and had everybody come to her rescue, and no one did. The last one was Govinda. There he came.
So starting with Kunti, she was known to always wish Draupadi the best in her life, even though she did not, as a mother-in-law, go through a lot of happiness in her life. Women, and as women who are going to be mother-in-law someday, I would like them to keep in mind that the human nature is, okay, if I suffer, then you always kind of think, okay, I suffered, why should I wish happiness to everybody else, right? So Kunti was different. She always wished well for her daughter-in-law, even though she was not going through good times in her life. There is a story about Kunti in Mahabharata where she asked Krishna to continue giving her suffering in life, because in the face of sufferings is when she would remember God.
Yes.
As the world is marching into the
Kali Yuga.
Kali Yuga. I think think there's more and more suffering, and I think a lot of people are resorting to spirituality these days to get out of this. What do you think about that?
I would say yes. Janani, you obviously wanted me to talk about the transition from the previous yuga to this yuga. Happened with Arjuna's grandson. Okay, and when the yuga changed, we always talk about what did we learn from the previous era. So the things that we learned were women have to be respected. What caused the war? It was the gambling. It was the intoxication. It was the disrobing of Draupadi. Okay? So Kali came about saying that these were the things that is going to cause disruption or destruction in the world. Kali is described as a cow which has all these legs, and these legs stand for all these bad things. And so when we say it's Kali Yuga, it's actually all the bad things that's combined, and we make it as a cow, but a figurative speech of a personification of a cow, but it is not actually a cow. It is just saying that these are the bad things that people should get away from. And respecting women comes as the number one thing. And if somebody doesn't respect you, you ask for it and you stand up for yourself. And this is what happened in the previous era. We are not going to make the same mistake. And that's where the history plays an important role. Learning as a lesson that, hey, I need to be respected.
One thing I wanted to say is, I know there are a lot of people in this world interested in some of these things, but they are probably figuring out where to go, what to do. My only advice is never stop asking why or what next. I'm sure we have seen kids asking that when they're very young, like why? This is why it happened. Why? Again, why? That's how it got me to where I am today. Don't stop until you are satisfied with the answer.
That's important.
That's important.
Yes.
But have faith in yourself and keep doing your duty. Things will fall in place.